Standing Rural. I'm Erin Borla with the Roundhouse Foundation. My mother is an artist, and here at Roundhouse we host an artist residency program that brings people from all walks of life and from around the country to our rural part of Oregon to support them as they tap into their creativity and connect with other artists, the community, and the place. Art for art's sake. I've had people in high places say that to me. Isn't it just art for art's sake? When I heard that, I was frustrated because I see art as a gateway for so many things, for mental health, youth engagement, expression, creative problem solving, even economic development in a community. When philanthropy invests in art, we're investing in so much more than art for art's sake. I learned a lot about that from Shirod Younker. I'm a Shirod fangirl. I saw his work at a shop in Seattle, and I was blown away by his story. Then, by happenstance, I was in a class led by his wife, and he was a guest speaker. I asked for a meeting and couldn't believe he said yes. It was like meeting a movie star. He's from Coos Bay, Oregon, an enrolled member of the Coquille Indian Tribe. He's also Umpqua and Filipino. He's an artist and art educator who has done amazing things for Indigenous youth in the Northwest through programming at universities, as well as the Changing Currents Tribal Water Leadership Program, where he manages the Youth Tribal Summit. He is also a traditional artist and carver. He carves paddles and has been very involved with the canoe journey, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Shirod's touched a lot of lives and used his art to do a whole lot of good. But he told me he had pretty humble dreams about his career as a young man.
When I look back at it now, I really just wanted to stay in Coos Bay and fish my grandfather's fishing boat and make art. That was my whole plan in life. I didn't really think any outside of that. I was thinking that way all the way up until high school, and then of course realized that wasn't really a possibility, especially with the fishing industry going down. But then the dream of making art, I didn't really realize that you could do that for a living. Although you see what other people do, you don't really know the steps to get there. It was always, you need to go to school, right? You need to go to college and you got to pay for it yourself. And I had siblings that had older siblings that had done that. So I just went to Oregon State, and I didn't really have a plan, but was taking art at Oregon State.
Yeah. And I know you're really involved in Canoe Journey, and a lot of the work that you do is around like paddles and other things like that. And that has to do with Canoe Journey. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, definitely. It's I guess the utilitarian objects like that are really important for me in the sense that they become objects that can help bridge time, right? Because then you're doing something that your ancestors did. So that window of opportunity to understand how they think, while you're making it, and two, while you're putting it into action, it becomes a much longer period in which you can hopefully understand the way that they're thinking, so that maybe they're sharing that information with you and teaching you something after the fact, whatever those, either what those aesthetics are, or two, what the values that they're trying to convey to you, right? What is important. Now, in terms of canoe journeys, that's a more regional thing, which was based more off of the Salish Sea and the people losing the right of passage, or tribal people losing the right of passage in those commercial shipping lanes. So back in the 80s, there were just a few tribal leaders that got together and say, how do we retain this right? And then the elders said, well, why don't we bring back this older way of traveling from village to village like we used to visit our relatives for trade, marriage, etc., and ceremonies, and we'll enact that in a form. And they did that, I think, in 1989. And then along the process of doing that, making that trip, they were encouraging other tribal villages to do the same, or tribes to do the same. And so it created this movement to make canoes for the villages that didn't have them. and to bring back those songs and ceremonies. So there is, um, so I originally had made paddles just for my family, just to understand what our paddles were, our tribal paddles were. And then eventually it led to getting canoes for our community and then helping other tribes and working together. So it has been very helpful. And I still think that that's relevant. And even understanding the environment now, we can't, it's hard to find an old cedar log if we
Mhm.
find one at all, or if we do find one that's still standing, is it even beneficial for us to cut that down when there's so few left to make a canoe so that we can learn about the environment, right?
Yeah.
Like, all right, we got to kill this to do this to do that. When possibly we can incorporate some modern canoe building or boat building techniques to make
Mhm.
a canoe that still has the within millimeters or centimeters of the correct lines of an older canoe, and then we can
Mhm.
still add those cultural components to it and understand that. But that's a lesson to ourselves, like we don't have the environment's not in a place where we can just take a tree whenever we want to, and this is what we have to do now. And so
Yeah.
that's a good lesson for us, and understanding that, and that really should be the lesson, is like, okay, how do we put things in balance, how do we bring these things back, the environment back, so at least so my ancestors or my descendants have the ability to have the same options that my ancestors did. So it's the
Mhm.
work that needs to be put in, and art is a wonderful way, especially tribal arts is a wonderful way to get us to think about those things, because otherwise we're just thinking about not the bad things, but a lot of it is about the things that have been done to us. And I mean, that is an important thing to speak out about, the things that are wrong, but you can't live there. You can't, I mean, well, we do live there, we do live with that, but you can't live there all the time. And I think, at least for me, the creative aspect is, okay, either making these things so that I can put them in action so I can know more, or helping other people learn the skills so that they can go down their own tribal unique path. And that's really where trying to put an ads in people, more people's hands, or put a knife in more people's hands so that they can at least learn the skills at a formative age, where they can understand that process is the most important thing, and that they can utilize it to find out and add more to the basket of knowledge that we have.
You talk about that interconnection even in the work that you're doing now with do we fell that tree because we don't have an abundance of those, and you're looking at the environment as it intersects in a way that I think can sometimes be dismissed. And maybe that's not accurate, but it feels like, especially in the funding side, well, arts, is it arts for art's sake? I remember somebody asked me that at one
Mm.
point. It's like, no, there's so much more to it, and it intersects with all these other
Yep.
pieces. And even with the changing currents work that you do, the youth water summit, I mean, all that, you can't have a canoe paddle in a canoe if you don't have water.
Yep. And then when you're on the water, you start seeing the things that need to be tended to. So this art form has led me to a different viewpoint. I mean, you're traveling
Mm.
at top, at best, at 6 knots, right? So you're seeing things at a different speed, and
Yeah.
you're seeing things that are wrong that you wouldn't normally see if you weren't out on the water. And to make your art, you are inspired by nature. Well, if you're inspired by nature, then you need to put in work to speak for nature. And so,
Mm.
yeah, so art will lead you into the direction that your spirit wants to go anyways, or
Yeah.
doesn't know that it needs to go.
You mentioned getting closer to things and about being on the water, and you see things differently. And I see that, like, even with philanthropists that I know have this the best of intention of, oh, we're going to do all this work to support the ocean health or water, and they've never been out on the water.
Yeah, they don't
They've
see it, they
never.
don't take time to see it, and that's the important thing, or they become hyper focused on one thing, right? And it's like, okay, I really wanna save the puffins, so I'm gonna throw money at the puffins, make sure the puffins have, I mean, this is theoretical, right? throw money at the puffins or throw a bunch of feed at the puffins, where you're realizing, okay, well, the puffins depend on this animal and this animal depends on this, and there's multiple things that they need to do. And how do we do that? Well, one philanthropist
Yeah.
cannot do that. I mean, I'm sure there are, but they are wealth hoarders, and those are our corporations as well. Their duty is to keep their business running. And at the expense of the environment or at the expense of their consumer. The consumer has become a product. So,
Well, it comes back to balance, right? You talk about balance in nature, you talk
yeah,
about balance in art, and it's how do we find that balance where
yeah,
folks can thrive?
yeah. And
It's interesting. How has work? I mean, I know that you're in a variety of different roles. One with the program that you're doing at the school, another with Changing Currents. I mean, what does that look like when you're looking to seek funding? What are some of the challenges that you run into
right.
in those spaces?
Well, mainly because I'm stretched out in multiple things doing that. Obviously, it's time, right? Having enough time to do that as an individual, right? So I think for me, it's the little details, all the details of multiple things, and trying not to confuse them, so that I can be successful as an individual in the many things that I do. And then the expectations of each of those projects that are funded by different philanthropies. They want so much, or
Yeah.
most want a lot. They want more than what they're paying for or what they're funding in terms of reporting or whatnot. And so even in the well, I personally can't separate myself from just so I can just make art. I have to put in work as an obligation, as an individual, as a tribal person, to speak for the things that cannot speak for themselves. That's the covenant that our people made with the environment, with the flora and fauna, since time immemorial, since the beginning of what we understand who we are as people. It's like, if you want to live here, this is how you live here. Now you have to speak for the things. You have to speak
Mhm.
for us. And so I can't make tribal art without doing that as well. Am I good at that? Am I good at both? I don't think so. Right. But I am. It's a process, right?
That's right. That's
Right.
right. Well, and I think one thing that we've heard with the residency program here too is the desire to work in community, to build in community, and where oftentimes I think we think of artists as an individual or a free spirit, and they're working on their own, and this desire to have to build something as a collective is different than what we hear in sort of a more colonial art form.
Yeah. Well, definitely the way that we look at art is different, or the way that art is taught is different. Right. I mean, you look at Western art, and you have a canon of art, and then you have the people that push themselves above the canon of art, and create a new movement. And so it's
Mhm.
like, this is different. I'm seeing things different, and then they're exalted or expressed, and of course their egos get real big. Right. That's usually what happens. And then they create this movement, and then the next artist in the next generations, they push through it, and then they create something, and they do, you know what I mean? And so it's
Yeah.
separating themselves from the last. Whereas or at least my belief of indigenous art is replicating stuff, replicating that art form or the parameters, so that you understand your connection within the whole, or your universe, or your tribal world, your own tribe's worldview, and how you wrap up. So it becomes a language, another language to express those values there.
Yeah. So how can folks that aren't from those spaces that have that thought of that they want to help in that mission, how do they do that when they're not there other than making their applications easier?
Oh boy. I, I honestly think it's important for them to see and to understand these things. And I don't know how you do that. I mean, you have to be a really intelligent person to be able to sit at the 30,000 foot level all the time, and be able to really good eyesight and to
Yeah.
see what's happening on the ground. And obviously that does not happen within the government, right?
Yeah.
They are deluded. A lot of them are deluded and surround themselves with people that will always say yes to whatever their crazy ideas are. So they
Yeah.
don't really get to know what people are struggling with. So I don't know how you do that if you don't go down and look and evaluate and see it. I mean, not necessarily pass judgment on how they could change their lives or where they need to be, but to see what the next steps are. Because a lot of times it's like, well, you need to be here, and it's 10 steps out of their
Yeah.
range of getting there, where they just need the next step, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of philanthropists, or I mean, I shouldn't say a lot because I am not a philanthropist, but my perception of them is that they see and they say, we want this here. They want the end product. Once again, they want the end product without
Hmm.
the process to get there. And our tribal communities are the same. They
Yeah.
see the end product. We need a home run. We need a home run. I was like, we just need a base hit and need to get on base. Quit dumping all your money into one guy to hit a home run. Like,
Yeah.
because, they strike out most of the time, right? Then you've spent all your money on this one
Yeah.
guy. And
Yeah, no, I get it.
next,
And we say that a lot of like, are we going to be happy with these incremental steps forward
yeah,
that are getting us to success? Or are we only going to be happy with, sweeping change or sweeping
yeah,
reform? And I think those smaller steps get us there. And I love that it brings it back to sort of your conversation about that value and how do you align your values with the work. And part of that is hard work and resilience and
yeah.
coming back and coming back and coming back and just trudging a little bit forward each time.
Yeah. How do you teach hard work, right? And I personally believe it's the it's the showing them how to make art for
Yeah.
themselves, not necessarily art to make money, although that can happen, but art, how to make art something for themselves that they want to do every day. They'll
Yeah.
figure out how to way to make money with it if they want to do that, but they'll also figure out how to instill what those values are, importance of whatever's being shown them via their own thoughts, and they'll get that way. But I just think that's one form of doing that. Obviously there's other incentives to do that. You got to just get them to love whatever they're doing,
Yeah.
and finding purpose in that, and then also we should be repeating that to them at a very young age. It's about the process. It's
Hmm.
about learning to love what you do and love where you're at, and wanting to make it better, or wanting to excel at that. And I think some cultures do that better than others, and I don't believe our because we're the US is a you know we love the home run,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and
That's
and
the big win. You
yeah,
want
we
the big
love
win.
seeing the win, and that's what's proliferated on social media,
Yeah.
right? I think indigenous art, it's never about me or
Mm.
I. It's always about we. So even my greatest accomplishment, whatever that may be, I don't know. It's not me. It's
Yeah.
really not me. It's whoever invested in me. It's
Hmm.
it's my ancestors who invested in me. It's whoever set the parameters of that art form before, and then the work that I had to add to it. So it's still just a basket that I'm adding on to, this never ending basket. So I think some of our artists miss those teachings because they produce something, and then they don't have a community teaching, they don't have a group, so they're just learning stuff. So then it becomes them making native art for themselves, and
Mm.
it's contrary to what indigenous art is, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if it's an ethnic identifier, if it's to explain what our cultural values of our people are, and humility is a huge one in that, and we're making art for the public that's not our own community, then we can separate ourselves from community. It's that conundrum. You end up separating yourself from the community to make money,
Hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
then it stops. You end up speaking to these people, but you're not upholding why our art was to for in the first place. So it's been extrapolated. So I think for philanthropy is understanding especially with the traditional art forms, you need to continually fund those things at a basic level or even intermediate level, so that those little lessons on how we're supposed to be as human beings will permeate, and you have more people before they decide to venture in and become an artist at another level. Because since we have so few of them, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're being taught that, because really the outside community does not teach us how to be humble. It does not. It's the exact opposite. They want to hear us talk about ourselves in the same format that other artists from Western art sense talk about themselves. But our communities need us to work with them and have a succession plan of showing what art, how it can help make you the right type of person that continues building community.
Thinking about art as a community building block and the opportunity to teach young people not only a skill or a trade or an art, but to be able to pull that together as part of a community is something that we ingrain into all of our students and our community, or should. I think about how I raise our kids at home, and my husband and I work closely to encourage them that whatever is going to light their fire, and how do we support their passion? And it changes, right? Kids have changing identities and changing things that they're passionate about. But how do we dig in, and how do we support that in a way that allows them to shine and connect them with people that may have similar skills to help build their skills and then build their connectivity? And we do that at the foundation level too, right? I always say we try to connect the disconnected. And what does that mean? So when you're working with students at the school or community members, it's not just the high flyers. It's the kids that are sitting against the wall in the hallway, and it maybe isn't the classroom teacher. Maybe it's the custodian or the food service worker that's seeing those students that are pulling themselves out. How do we pull them back in? And I really love touching on how do we get a little bit closer? How do we, and I know we talk about that a lot, how do you get closer to the issue that you're interested in? You don't learn enough about ocean health unless you're on the water. We talk about that with the ranch program that we have here at Roundhouse. Not only is it connecting people to the land, but it's also connecting our grant partners to opportunities they may not be able to capitalize, but they could come and see and look and learn from it, and then implement after they see how it functions. Thanks for listening. We'll have links to Shirod's work, show notes, and more at fundingrural.com.